Futuring is, I think, and jump in on this, is, I think, our attempt to add a friendlier tone to a word foresight, which is the technical discipline that I was trained. I wouldn't call it technical. That's a discipline behind futuring. And foresight, unfortunately, turns out to be a very clumsy word. You know, it suggests what we're trying to communicate, but it's unnecessarily complicated, I think. So futuring is our attempt to simplify that. Futuring, following on what we've been talking about so far, is at its very simplest level an attempt at collective imagination, participatory collective imagination. Applied, and this is, as you can imagine, it has a very broad sphere of application. It's used by governments, it's used by world bodies. I know the people who meet in Davos, the World Economic Forum, they have a foresight group. They're doing foresight for entire countries and entire regions, etc. I've heard of foresight initiatives at the scale of 7 countries that border the Arctic Ocean coming together and saying, what is the future of the Arctic Ocean and how do we manage that jointly as countries who have a vested interest, all the way down to the level of startups and entrepreneurs doing it for a 4-person organization. So it's a very flexible approach to figuring out the future. One level down, what are some of the mechanics of it? One of it is accepting uncertainty and sort of going with the reframing the question to start with. You know, asking different sorts of questions is a very important part of the methodology. And from there on, I think in a sharp answer to your question, Ruchita, it's a little bit of combining some things that we can know and a lot of things that we don't know, that you have to observe the edges to have a decent idea of what's coming, whether it's trends and you combine those two things in a creative or imaginative way. And you try to create these story worlds, which is, again, my friendlier attempt to explain scenario planning. These story worlds that provide a very human and comprehensive backdrop against which you can try out different things. And this is where the whole approach that startups are pioneering comes in, that trying out can utilize or leverage all these lean startup methodologies. So you de-risk that process so it doesn't seem like organizations are trying everything at a lot of expense. But maybe I rushed through this, but that's sort of the sequence of futuring methodology. Try to ask better questions at the front, because there's a lot of the process of planning that hinges on the questions that you ask. And it's become an underappreciated art in conventional planning because people assume the question is the same as last year's plan or the year before. But now that we have the backdrop of this uncertain world and lots of new ways of asking questions, there needs to be a little more effort and time and reflection, I think, of asking the right questions for the planning cycle. And then methodology-wise, it becomes, okay, now that we don't know, how do we combine? And when I said some of the things that we know, these are on the level of, I'll give you an example. The population of Europe is aging. That's just a demographic trend. So by 2030, they expect half the population of Europe to be 60 plus, something, you know, not the exact numbers. But that's the kind of thing that we can know, because that's already in motion. And most people agree that that's irreversible. People have already been born, etc. And there's nothing drastic going to happen to life expectancy. So there are a few things like that. We're going to have scarcity of some resources. We're running out of oil. So when we said, you know, the future can be predicted, we didn't mean to issue such a blanket statement saying we cannot know anything. But how do we combine some things that we know with a lot of granular things about the future of organizations, where the customer is going, what the needs are? Those are the really uncertain things. So how do we bring these things together in a very creative kind of process that might appear very unfamiliar to organizations? Because very often planning departments aren't the places where creativity lies, if it exists at all in business. You know, it's certainly not within the planning groups.
Thank you, Manoj. Gopi, would you like to, I'm sure you have, you know, something to say about.
I think I'd like to broadly focus on 3-4 words, and I'll keep it short because I think Manoj very eloquently covered the entire gamut of futuring. I think the 3-4 keywords for me is participatory, the question, sensing, and signals. These are 4 keywords for me. One is how participatory it is. Is it top down, bottom up, left, right, entire organization, entire ecosystem? I think futuring to be is about how much I can get people to participate in that exercise. So that's a key word for me. The second keyword, as Manoj said, that I would like to kind of reinforce, that what is the question that you would like to ask yourself? That's critical. I think that's where a lot of us need to focus on. And I completely agree with Manoj. We're all trained in our academic system to answer questions. We're not trained to ask questions. I don't know of a single university which comes out with an answer paper and says, why don't you question it? So we all know how to answer. So the second part is, what's the right question? The third, I like to use the word sense here. To me, I could be very tactical and follow a Western construct of work-life balance and professionalism, but to me, it's an Eastern construct of what's your sense of the business? What's your ball sense? What's your field sense? To me, I need to tap into that. They may not be very loud signals, but they're there somewhere in your body, your organization body. I need to sense it. And fourth, signals. And I think, in one of my earlier conversations, a very thought-provoking conversation outside a tea shop in Chennai when Manoj had visited us from New York, we talked about the signals are there. We need to catch it. The future is there today. It is scattered. We need to focus on those signals. If I was running an industry, I'd like to look at what are the signals in which my future of my industry is embedded. So these are 4 keywords for me. 1, how much participatory can I get? 2, what's the question I would like to ask myself? 3, get my senses in futuring. And 4, where are the signals? And remove the noise out. The question will help me to remove the noises so that I can focus on the sense the signals, so to speak.
Gopi, just to piggyback on that, I'm so glad that you brought up signals, which is also a very precious input for creating scenarios and imagination. And you laid it out beautifully, because without the right question, there might be signals right in front of your face, but you don't know to look for them. And it was captured in a famous quote in the futuring circles from a science fiction writer called William Gibson. And he said, the future is already here. It's just not very evenly distributed. And I would add, it's not in the places that you're looking for normally, because you're asking the wrong question or the outdated question.